Hi, welcome to the 9th episode in the classic epic SEO is AEO series, how Google uses the knowledge graph in its AE algorithm. I've been really looking forward to this one because I'm really keen on the knowledge graph, and I've got three amazing guests. Bill Slawski, who I've been reading for the last 6 months and still trying to keep up with him, having a few issues with that, obviously. Andrea, who I met a couple of weeks ago, probably 3 or 4 weeks ago, and is phenomenally intelligent, really smart, really nice guy. And Cindy, who I met yesterday, it was a Friday, and she's absolutely delightful, and I'm really looking forward to what she's got to say. So we have Andrea Volpini, Cindy Krum, and Bill Slawski as guests, and we're talking about how Google uses the knowledge graph in its answer engine algorithm. So we're going to introduce the guests while we're waiting for the few stragglers to pick up, and we can start with Cindy. How are you today over there in America?
I'm okay over here in America. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. Over here in France. Whereabouts are you?
Colorado.
Where's that, in the middle, on the left, on the right?
Middle, by the mountains, by like Aspen and Vale and Breckenridge.
Cool. Colorado Ridge, is that a thing?
Ridge, no. Colorado
no, okay. Oh, it's the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I'm sorry, I'm not very good.
It's okay.
I was looking at your profile. You've written a book about finding customers wherever they are, which is because you're right into mobile. Is that right?
Right. Yes, I've been a mobile SEO expert since before iPhones.
Ooh, 2005, yeah?
Good, yes.
I'm good at numbers. That's great stuff. And it's been translated into Korean, Chinese, German, and Italian.
Yes.
So Andrea can read it.
Yes.
Thanks.
Twice.
Brilliant.
In English.
But also, another interesting thing I found out about you is that you actually come from a business and art degree.
Yes.
And we're a graphic designer. Now, I didn't know they did business and art together. I thought art was...
They're separate degrees. It's 2 degrees at once.
Ah, so you did 2 degrees at once?
Yeah, like a dual degree. Business with a focus in marketing and art with a focus in graphic design.
Oh, brilliant. Wow, that's cool. You suddenly seem much cleverer to me now. I'm a bit embarrassed. I only managed to do one at a time. I can now go on to Bill because I know that Bill worked his way through university. You had a full-time job while you were going to university. Is that right, Bill?
That is right.
Cool. I think that's right impressive. And you did English and then you did law.
Right.
And then you ended up working in a court and started doing their techie stuff and installing their systems. And that's how you got into SEO, right?
I was working as a legal administrator in the court, and every time somebody had a problem with the computer, they'd ask me to help them because they realized that I could usually get it fixed within a couple hours. If they had help from the Judicial Information Center people, it would take a couple days.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that then segued into doing SEO and writing about it and learning about it. And
I had some friends who taught me how to build computers who wanted to start a business. And I picked up a Learn HTML in 2 Weeks book and learned HTML and built them a website.
But did you learn it in 2 weeks, 1 week, or 3 weeks?
It took me around 2 weeks.
Brilliant.
It's not the ugliest website you've ever seen. Thankfully, it's not saved in the Wayback Machine because it would make a good Christmas card.
With lots of bells and whistles that don't really work.
Lots of holly leaves and green leaves, and it was really festive.
Oh, that's great. Was it for Christmas or was it just bad taste?
It helped people incorporate businesses, and it was effective. A lot of people used it.
Yeah, great. No, I started back in '98 doing a site for kids, and that was lots of colours and things, but it's okay for kids. You get away with it. But it was very effective, and that was a fun time. And learning HTML in 2 weeks, hats off to you, boy. And then you did
spinning globes and all the other metaphors at the time. It was
great stuff. And then you did what was it? Createster forums?
Create a Site forums with
that was it.
She is an SEO and usability practitioner. She knows that stuff really well. She started a Yahoo club and to help small business owners learn how to start websites. And I joined her as moderator. We realized that Yahoo clubs wasn't an ideal platform because Yahoo had a tendency to break things that they took over. Yeah. They start their own version, and pretty soon you'd have two versions, neither of which worked well. So we started a new domain, and we got some other people who are in the SEO industry, like Joe Whalen and Eamon Johns, join us and learned a lot from them.
Brilliant. And then 13 years later, here you are.
There we go.
Welcome. So on to Andrea. I mean, we've been talking about the ambiguity of names. Now we're going to start getting a bit professional. We were talking about an Italian swimmer, but I'm not interested in him at all. There's a 16th century Italian poet, but he's not very interesting either. There is a tennis player, a swimmer, and a total training guy. So you should be really good at sport. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I started with looking at my name and seeing all these people and then trying to make a difference. But I'm still learning HTML, by the way, and I started in '96.
Brilliant. And you started off in business and then went over to lecturing at the university and then came back to business, or did you keep doing business all the time?
I've been moving back and forth, but I think I'm more on the business side, though I come back to research every now and then, and I've been creating a large website all through my life. And as I was doing this in 2002, then I started to learn about semantic web as a way of organizing this large website. And so that's where I started my journey.
Okay, so I mean, Bill was saying earlier on that he started doing some semantic stuff in 2005 or something. So we actually have these great old grandfathers, if I may, for you too, of semantic on the web. Plus two people who've been in the web for a long time, and three people who have all got incredible qualifications for one reason or another, either because they did two at once, or because they finance themselves, or because they're still doing it. Which is brilliant. I'm really, really pleased. Welcome to all three of you. Welcome to the audience. I think this is going to be an astonishingly good webinar. And if the audience want to ask questions, this is a unique opportunity to ask questions about the knowledge graph to Andrea, Cindy, or Bill. That opportunity doesn't come up too often. So grasp it with both hands, if I may suggest that. Now, we're going to get going really quickly. I've shown this before, and I wanted to show it again because I love saying Fluffy McCoy. Knowledge graphs are large networks of entities. They're semantic types, properties, and relationships between those entities. I think that's really clear. I think 6 months ago, I wouldn't have thought that was so very clear. So I picked this one up from Bill. A knowledge graph has entities that are connected by nodes to other information about them. George Washington is a US president. That's much simpler. So straight on to Bill after his quote. Where does Google get the fact about entities it answers questions about from? Please, Bill.
Google has been building up information in a knowledge graph for since at least 2012. They actually started back in 2005 with something they called the fact repository. Andrew Hogue, who is now the head of search for Foursquare, was working on a project called the annotation framework. I got that from a resume of his that he was online. He headed a group of about 13 or so people who were building things like Google Maps, which structured data matters to a lot. And the ability to take statements, triples, subject, action, object. Bill Slawski lives in California. Subject, object, object, subject, object, action. That ability to get those properties and know when I'm missing and update them is how Google might continuously update its knowledge graph. So if you have Jerry Brown as governor of California and you go through an election and he's no longer the governor of California, Google could possibly look up and see who the new governor of California is and update its knowledge graph. It could be a continuous thing, just like Google updates links to web pages. Being able to update facts like that is something that's possible. And if Google continuously does that and continuously learns, there's a project they bought about 5 or 6 years ago called Wavy, which uses something called open language information extraction, where they have crawlers read the web and learn from the web, regardless of the topic, and add to a information store, a data store, a knowledge graph, in other words, and continuously update those things. We have queries where they're not the results of searches featured snippets. They're what we see normally as regular search results. And if you ask Google a question like, what movie did Robert Duvall say, I love the smell of napalm in the morning in? You get the top 2 results are 2 YouTube videos with him saying that. And that's a query, that's a SERP, that's an ordinary search result. It's not a featured snippet. It's not what we normally see when we think of knowledge graph answer, but that's what Google is evolving towards, being able to search things like structured data and schema and give us search results that point to specific pages.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, great. I mean, what I gathered from the first half of that is that we're looking much more and more at Google understanding or attempting to understand language and then apply it to the knowledge graph it's got or the knowledge it has. And I like the idea of renewing information. I read a thing about unlearning, which somebody was saying computers need to learn to unlearn in order to advance. Is that a silly comment or is that a reasonable thing to say?
If you go to like the DeepMind website, you can read about machines that learn how to play things like Go and chess. You can learn about machines that dream. You can learn about machines that remember. And they're simulating human activity and how they learn. It's kind of interesting to see computer scientists try to learn from humans to build machines.
Oh, sure, right. Okay. Well, bet their dreams aren't as good as mine. I had some pretty good ones last night. So I'll be thinking about that later on, trying to make them better tonight. Next. Cindy, thank you very much, Bill. That was wonderful. I'm sorry to make silly comments about dreams at the end. Bill was talking about triples earlier on, semantic triples. You talk about Fraggles. I thought that was a kid's show or where they live on a rock somewhere. Are they related? How are they related? And what are Fraggles?
Yeah, so Fraggles are something that I've just started talking about, and they are named after Fraggle Rock, the little people, the Muppet show. But what I'm seeing, and one of my core theories about how mobile-first indexing changes SEO is related to Fraggles, and I just named it Fraggles because they're a mix of a fragment and a handle. A handle is something like a bookmark that used to allow you to click on something and scroll down the page. Do you know, you following so far? Okay, and then a fragment is just a piece of a page or a piece of an app or just a piece of text that probably occurs in the form of a triple or an answer or something that's marked up with schema that tells Google that this is the beginning and the end of a thought or an idea. And the reason I think they're so important is Google appears to be starting to rank pieces of text on a page independently of each other. So they're not just ranking the page anymore, but they're ranking the bits on the page, the Fraggles. And we see this especially being tested a lot with results from forums and things like that, where you have a best answer. All of those answers, they have a carousel sometimes of best answer or multiple answers. All of those answers are on the same page. But when you click on one of the things in the carousel, it takes you in and scrolls you to that answer because it's a really, really long page. The thing to know is that bookmark, that handle, isn't actually coded into the page. Google put it there. Google is finding where to scroll to. Google's not crawling looking for bookmarks. It's crawling looking for things like H tags and schema to know when there's a snippet. And this is especially important because the worst thing you can imagine in a voice query is Google reading a list of blue links as a search result or reading an entire web page. Google needs to find the answer to the query or the question and not start at the header and read through the navigation and read until it gets there. It needs to find the actual thing that you're looking for to be a good experience, and that necessitates Fraggles. But one more point, and then I'll let you get a word in. The important thing about Fraggles is that Fraggles can come from more than just web pages, and Fraggles are especially good at allowing Google to index long JavaScript apps, native apps, things that don't have URLs as places to stop. It allows them to grab all of the stuff and rank it without needing the URLs, and to show it as the response to a voice query, or to lift it and reuse it as an answer, as a rich snippet. Or the best example I'm seeing of this remashing of bits of the internet is in Google AMP stories. They're just lifting little quotes and lifting little things from here and there and finding pictures over here and jamming it all into an AMP story. And those, I think, are also driven by Fraggles.
Ooh, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. That's something new that we hadn't heard of or heard about before. That's perfect. I mean, that makes me think. I mean, your idea of it was handles and
fragments.
Fragments, thank you very much. Makes me think of what Jono Alderson was saying about now thinking in blocks rather than having web pages. We have web pages are a block within a site, and within the web page we have a block. And I was working with a client, and we did lots of schema markup and HTML5. I'm a bit obsessed by HTML5 with all the anchors. And in fact, I might as well have not bothered, because Google's going to find them anywhere with the H2. I don't need to do HTML5 specifically. Well,
I think the anchors are going to help. It's another signal of, like, this is good to read. This is a good answer. It couldn't hurt. And absolutely, what Jono talks about with Gutenberg fits completely with what I talk about with Fraggles. Jono and I are often on the same page, and I think it's brilliant. But it also fits with knowledge graph, because the way blocks work is nested, right? They can have vertical relationships or lateral relationships. And so that's how this all fits together, is that you may talk about many things on one page, and those things could be related to many things and need to be categorized according to the knowledge graph rather than just according to the URL. Like, the URL might become meaningless if we talk about apples, bananas, and oranges all on one page. It might be a fruit page, but the things might need to filter into specific ideas that are different from just the page.
No, brilliant. And that whole concept really makes sense to me. I'm incredibly happy you mentioned it. And Bill did just reassure me that using structured data and schema, and I assume HTML5 can be a smart move.
I'm never going to tell people not to do that, or at least not in the near future.
But as you say, it's an extra signal, and every extra signal does help. But Google's getting smarter and smarter, and is now able to do it more or less on its own.
It's the new SEO, man. You are ahead of your time.
And one thing I did I did this for a client, and I kind of thought, oh, maybe it will pull them up into positions into this featured snippet, but I have never seen that yet. Have you seen that?
The best way I've seen to get into a featured snippet.
No, sorry. I meant your fragments. Seeing a fragment being pulled up as a featured snippet.
Yeah, I mean, I would call a featured snippet a Fraggle. They're not different. There's not a hard definition. A Fraggle is just a bit of text that can be lifted off of a page and shown anywhere. So I would say that they're not different.
Okay, and I've dumped the position 0 question at the end, which I asked on all the other episodes, and now I'm starting to regret it, but I'm going to add featured snippet equals Fraggle. I
would say, loosely. So the featured snippet right now, it's not necessarily scrolling to the piece on the page, but I think it probably will soon for the web experience. But from a voice perspective, yeah, absolutely the same.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that when you can do that. And you also said we're now looking at things being referenced according to their place in the knowledge graph rather than their URL or their place on the web. And that comes into what Aaron Bradley was saying is don't put your money in websites, which I quite like.
Yeah, I agree with him too. Absolutely. Google wants to be a doorway page to get between your information and your users and decide, because it's important as a disambiguation for the use case. So if you're voice, Google wants to send you voice appropriate stuff. If you're web, they want to send you web appropriate stuff.
Sure. We're gonna have to wake up, I think, a little bit as an industry. Right, back to Bill. Thank you very much, Cindy. That was wonderful. Back to Bill. How does Google update information in the knowledge graph in an automated fashion? I think you touched on this very slightly earlier on, so you can now expand on updating itself in a automated fashion.
Okay, so Google collects in. My phone goes off when I say Google. Okay. Google collects information in the knowledge graph, and it knows when it's got missing things. So if, like I said earlier, we have an election in California for a new governor, and Google realizes there's suddenly a gap in its knowledge graph about who the governor is. It no longer knows who the present day governor is. The term has expired from the last one. And it says, I need to fill this information in. Let me do a search to see if I can find out who the new governor is. It does a query, governor of California. It may look at fresh news sites and start seeing a name and go to the elections page and get verified information. We haven't talked about things like knowledge-based trust or ways to gauge the correctness of data or information yet. I mentioned Zen Luna Dong to you in a chat. She worked on Google's knowledge graph, and Knowledge Vault invented something called knowledge-based trust, which was a metric that involved having about 1,000 facts that you might run against different websites and see how many of those facts they got correct, they knew about, and give them scores. So one of the things that she did was she took some of the top gossip websites like Gawker and looked at how they ranked in terms of page rank, and they took 14 that ranked in the top 50% of the web in terms of page rank, and they're all in the bottom 50% in terms of knowledge-based trust. So they were like a world leader of the web. They had lots of information people were interested in, but they weren't too accurate. Those aren't the sites that you necessarily want to update knowledge graph with.
Yeah, you shared that information about Luna Dong with me, and I got a bit obsessed about it for a few weeks. And I really like that idea of knowledge-based trust and the fact that page rank and knowledge-based trust don't correspond. But we actually got a question from Arnu, which I was going to half ask, so it's now double as a question, is can you trigger an update? And my second part of that question is, if it takes 20 or 25 documents factually correct to confirm information, which is something Andrea suggested and I've seen suggested elsewhere, once somebody changes governor of California, whatever it is, how much false information or old information can you leave out there?
So one of the areas that we see the knowledge graph in action on the web, and has been in a long time at Google, is Google Maps. It's based on structured data, structured information, and we talk about NAP consistency, name, address, phone number, and how those make a difference in making sure that something ranks highly in Google Maps by them being consistent. So we want the same type of consistency in facts in other places, in other spheres, in other areas, other than just local entities.
Arnold was interested. I'm intrigued now that he's asked the question. Obviously we can't trigger an update to a knowledge graph other than the feedback button if we happen to be the owner of that. But have you got any ideas of how you can actually bully Google into updating itself?
we know that Zenluna Dong is no longer with Google. She left to join Amazon, so she's helping make Alexa better. Don't know if she's going to help improve the knowledge graph at all.
Well,
yes.
If I can jump in here, I don't know exactly how to necessarily trigger it, but I think something that smart companies are doing all over is creating databases and marking them up with schema and allowing Google to crawl the database or ingest it as a feed. And we're seeing more and more of this, and we're seeing more and more companies create their own knowledge graph that I think Google is going to take in as special expert knowledge graph. For instance, Spotify creating the music database, the all-knowing, wide-reaching music database. If Google knows that they have this database, it's probably marked up because Spotify is already working with Google on other things. As long as Spotify does a good job of keeping their database updated, then probably Google's ingesting that, or at least giving it a high confidence and trust for the facts coming out of that particular database. Again, the new SEO. And Bill, I would love to hear if you agree with stuff like that. But have you seen more and more of these companies that happen to partner with Google creating their own special knowledge graph or database?
Just before going back to Bill, in fact, I don't think it's even necessarily big companies who partner with them. I mean, my personal experience was I fed the knowledge graph, got myself in the knowledge graph, and I found that now when I feed Google structured data on my own site, it tends to believe me. That might be just me imagining it, but I do get that feeling. Bill,
yeah,
Matt's
absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Schema has an extension process where if you want to add information to schema, you can submit something. FIBO, Financial Industry Business Ontology, came out last year, and they help information for banks and so on. So I know some of the people from Google have worked on implementing that, and it's done things to help banks actually rank higher and show up in search results. There was a process that came out in 2014 from Google called Voipini, which is crowdsourcing of queries from Google. People ask things in query streams all the time. Google collects that information, the topics. They use those topics raised in query streams to extract other data from the web to update ontologies about different topics on the web. And it's
also, they had Freebase too, right, Bill?
Freebase was an acquisition from that Google got from MetaWeb when they acquired them back in 2011, which was a year before the knowledge graph, right? So Google.
I think that the question is the sources that are trustworthy or not. I mean, Simon Cox just put into the chat, update your Wikipedia page if you've got one. That'll probably update the knowledge graph, and that really is kind of stating the obvious, but none of us had stated it. Sorry.
Well, no. Simon, I think updating your brand, Google Posts, Google My Business is much faster than updating Wikipedia.
Brilliant. Sorry, Bill, we interrupted you.
Okay, so Google's fact repository started in 2005. They started doing question and answer featured snippet type things in 2005. So it's been a while since they've been doing that. They've been active in that type of stuff. When they started the fact repository, they added to that the same guy was involved in the metadata MetaWeb acquisition and Freebase. And Freebase has been taken over by Wikidata. And you can update Wikidata information, and it gets used in the same way that Freebase information was being used. Or at least it's similar in a lot of ways. They haven't quite now how that works, what the similarities are. But
perfect. Just coming very quickly back to the internal knowledge graphs and having your own structured data really quickly. I mean, I've been talking to Gennaro and Andrea about that, and that's exactly what Worldlift does. So I'll give them the plug so that Andrea doesn't have to do it. I had a quick play with it the other day on my own site, and it is really, really, really nice to use. Creating my own little knowledge graph in my own little corner. Cool stuff. So you don't have to be a big enterprise to create your own knowledge graph. You just need the right tools. Now, next question, luckily for us, is Andrea's. Now, here's my favorite little diagram, which is incredibly simplified of the idea of we have a question, we have with intent, sorry, we have Google understanding the web, and then we have the credibility of the different answers and the different sources allowing Google to rank it. Now, for me, the knowledge graph is the hub of that entire thing, which is why I'm so keen on it. So I will say to Andrea, the knowledge graph is the hub of answer engines, intent, understanding, and credibility. Does that flip, flop, or fly? Flip, flop, fly for information is a song. And from this point of view, it means, are you going to flip it, tell me it's wrong? Sorry, flip it, tell me another way of looking at this better, sorry. Is it going to flop, i.e. it's complete rubbish, or is it going to fly? Is it brilliant and genius and nobody's ever thought of it before? Go ahead, Andrea.
I'm a very positive person, so it's going to fly. Well, I mean, it's way more complicated than this. No, it's actually we have to look at the knowledge graph as a starting point of a knowledge base that has to support a lot of different processes, and of course we know for sure that for instance disambiguating an entities or connecting one entities with another, it's something that does happen with the support of the knowledge graph, but there is a lot more that comes into play. My own experience with playing with data is that, of course, the more we publish data, the more we connect data, the more we facilitate the work of a search engine or a smart assistant in understanding, where is the reality. Because a big issue is that, of course, for a search engine to understand, who is the right Andrea Volpini that talks about SEO and differentiate, the different digital footprints of this Andrea Volpini in comparison with the swimmer, it's a lot of work. It's a very hard job, and Google does this, but there is a lot of help that we provide when we start connecting with our own structured data, all the different websites that talks about ourselves. So this is a very simple way that let me see in a series of events that I was able to create events like an entities inside the graph. Like Gennaro is one case. Gennaro started to work with us, and he didn't have a knowledge graph panel. And so we started to publish, information using Worldlift on his blog. And what we did really was to leverage on one simple property or two simple properties. One is the schema.url, and the other one is actually a same as, schema same as. And also we use in the link data that the Worldlift published, we use another property that is called the OWL same as. That is a more strict version of the schema same as. By doing so in all the pages, we were able to let Google understand that Gennaro was also author of different books, and that it was also contributing to articles on different blogs, and so on and so forth. And all this information was, after a series of 3-4 months, was gathered into an entity. A similar example occurred on Bing. And we know, because I had a chat recently with some of the people in Bing, that they usually leverage on something between 20 and 30 websites before making a fact enter into their knowledge graph. And you can find, a very interesting entity representation in Bing as well. So the reality is that, search engine and crawlers and smart assistant, they have to crawl the web and gather as much data as possible, and then they have to verify this data. And so when it comes to understanding, if actually, what is the reality, we have to think back about the diagram of the semantic web, and there are two layers. One it's called proof, and one is called trust, and they are the uppermost layer of this diagram cake that no one's like, because it's always complicated to represent a technology stack with the diagram. But at the top of this cake, there is actually, the trust and the proof that it's needed, for a machine to understand, yes, this fact is true or is not. Can we falsify that? Of course we can. I mean, the more false fact we can combine and publish in a structured form, the more we can falsify. I was able to falsify several entities by acting on a mix of sources. And the more the website is iterative, the more the information is repurposed on different outlets, the more it becomes real. So it gets more complicated than that. But yeah, I'm a positive person.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. No, sure. I mean, I think if we go back to that screen, that representation is a very simple representation of a process that helps everybody look at this and be able to actually see the overall picture. However, I think it only half flies. It probably like flops, then flies, then flops, then flies. I'm thinking of a bird doing this. In the sense that it is much more complex than that, and the knowledge graph is integrated in so many different ways, so many different processes within that simple idea that I've put out.
There is also there's also a lot of volatility. Meaning that, of course, the information needs to be confirmed by user behaviors. And so, you know, you might have also, you see this in feature snippet, you might have a feature snippet and then it disappears and then it comes back again. So there is a lot of things that actually comes into play. Okay.
And Bill's just made the point of looking at ontologies that people like the BBC have created, because the BBC are presumably very big and have a great deal of information. I would imagine that they do a pretty good job, because the BBC is great.
Number one.
I used to watch it when I was a kid. I think it's great. And I don't think they had Fraggle Rock on, though. Right, back to Cindy with that. I'm doing these great segues. How do the knowledge graph and language make voice and cross-device search smarter for Google? This is another mobile-y question. The mobile Moxie.
So it's a mobile question, but it's also a machine learning question. Okay. So we have a 5-part series. 4 parts have gone live about the relationship between entities and language. And what I theorize in this series is that Google had a pretty great understanding of the world when the world was written in English, because Google was built for English. Schema markup is English-based. Lots of the stuff that Google builds its algorithm and machine learning stuff on is English-based. So it works for them, so they get it. But as we know, if you've ever done an international SEO project, the algorithm gets worse and worse based on the density of language speakers. If you have a small language, then the algorithm where that language is spoken tends to be very bad. And that's not scalable, because what was happening was the spammers were targeting the smaller languages and just spamming these other countries because English was much harder to spam. And so if Google figured out that if they can draw the parallels between language, and then they could get where they want to be faster. And so when I talk about this, I give the example of like a human and the way a human learns a language. When you're a little kid, you learn that like this is a table and this is a chair, and they often occur together, and you sit in the chair and you eat off of the table. And when I teach you a new language, you don't have to relearn that part. You already know that you sit in the chair and that this is a table and they often go together. But Google was relearning all of it. Google was crawling the web in separate languages. Remember when all of the separate languages had separate algorithms, right? And that was something that changed just before mobile first indexing launched, was they consolidated and they made stuff very international. It's also something that changes in the nuance of what you read when you read stuff from John Mueller. Instead of saying the right language will rank based on the algorithm, they say we switch in the right version of the page if there's href lang markup. They're understanding all of the stuff together at the same time, basically, or they're trying. And then they just switch in because that's faster and less resource intensive from a machine learning perspective. Does that make sense?
It does make a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, I'm in France and I speak French, and all my clients are French, so I do SEO in English very rarely. So this is actually quite a major question for me, and it is true. I do French SEO, and it's easier.
Yeah, it totally is. I know. And so how this relates to cross-device is that, and what we were talking about earlier with the Fraggles, is if we parcel everything out into Fraggles and we can find the right Fraggle, Google can translate it on the fly. They don't have to translate the entire web. They can, in the cloud, use voice translation and just read it to you in whatever language you need. And that's also faster because Google's put so much time and energy into popping out like 400 million Google voice-enabled devices just in like 6 months or something. And the problem is there's a shortage of content, especially in smaller languages. So what do? Instead of like searching harder for the content, which is resource intensive, they can use their translation APIs to just find the right answer and translate it.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah. No, sorry.
I would love to hear what everyone else has to think on this theory, because I've had these articles out for a while and I've got some pushback, but I think it totally makes sense.
Yeah, well, I think it makes sense, but I also think you're obsessed. Andrea? Sorry, I'm sorry if that sounded rude. It wasn't intended to be.
That's fine. I would agree.
I think the Fraggle idea is absolutely brilliant. I'm really into it, and what you just said makes incredible sense. Now, Andrea, what do you think?
I like the idea. I mean, it's a good framework. I mean, it's all a matter of making people understanding annotation, if you want. I mean, in a formal way, what you call Fraggle it would be an annotation. Means that you have a piece of text that belongs to a specific meaning or to provide a specific answer. There's actually one thing in Schema which is still being tested, and it goes in the direction of your Fraggle, that is the speakable item. Yes. Now, this being a specific snippet that we expect, the personal assistant to read aloud, and yes, I mean that's. I think you provide a good framework. I like it. I mean, I wasn't aware. I have to admit, I'm still learning, things, not only HTML5 but also.
Brilliant stuff. Bill, what are your thoughts on Fraggle, on the Fraggle idea?
Sorry, too many. I was responding to a chat comment. So I'm a little disturbed by some of what I'm seeing with machine learning at Google. I brought this up. Their federated machine learning just sort of bothers me because it's a little too limited to specific devices, to pixels. It's only taking information from pixel users and returning it to pixel users. And it's not looking at what's going on in other places, other devices, like desktops. So they're making the sample size smaller, and they're missing things. And that's probably good for a mobile device because you're bringing machine learning to lots of mobile devices. You're making it scalable, but you're losing some opportunities, I think. And Google's probably working on that, and they'll address that issue. But
okay,
I'm not quite sure how that's going to apply to the knowledge graph, to data.
Okay. Well, great. We actually got a comment from Elena Del Olmo. I can't say the last name. I'm sorry. We may see universal grammar being patented by Google very soon. Smiley face, which is kind of nice, cute comment. Which we can finish this part about how do the knowledge graph and language make voice and cross-device search smarter for Google. Now on to Andrea for his last question before we go into the bit where we're going to talk. Ask questions to all of you. The linked open data cloud, you mentioned this to me a few weeks ago, 1,224 data sets in the linked open data cloud. Google's knowledge graph suddenly starts to look a little bit smaller than it did a few weeks ago. Linked data knowledge graph for the future of search. If the web becomes a database, would we still need Google as its main gatekeeper? Sorry, go ahead, Andrea.
Yeah, I mean, I've been working a lot on this idea, starting from the original presentation about from Tim Berners-Lee about the semantic web. I think that the search problem arises when we had to deal with billions of pages. But now these billions of pages are becoming really a database, and I really encourage everyone to publish data in a interoperable format. So for me, there is no better way other than creating data to feed the machine outside. But of course, as this data becomes available, the search problem changes, because we are now capable of, for instance, answering to the question about the upcoming governor in California by running a very simple query on Wikidata. And Wikidata or DBpedia are going to be updated as soon as someone is gonna jump on the page on the Wikipedia article of California, and we're gonna see that update coming just in a matter of few minutes. I don't know if you noticed, but when something like that happens, Wikipedia is updated in a very, very timely fashion. And so we're going to be answering this question by traversing several graphs, and in this way we are going to have an infrastructure that provide answers that might be probably different, maybe more open than Google is right now. But so I mean, right now, of course, my focus, and I'm talking as an SEO, and we are creating a tool that helps companies get more visibility on Google. But at the same time, I think that the bigger picture is really to help people understand the value of publishing data, because the machine out there just need your data. And the more control you have on this data, the more important it gets. I mean, we had the discussion in the beginning about how do we update, or how do we trigger an update on the Google Knowledge Graph. But does that really matter? I mean, it does matter today because of the amount of people that are going through these machines. But I mean, doesn't seem more important that I become the source of everything that talks about myself or my business, the primary source, and then these primary sources reflected into different data sets and different graphs. I think it's more important to start looking at ourselves as data publisher rather than as people that have to find a way to trigger an update.
Yeah, I really get that. I mean, the idea that today we create this data and we're feeding Google. Tomorrow we might need to be feeding somebody else. I know Martha Van Berk is terribly keen on Bing. Arnold was talking about Amazon perhaps being interesting, Alexa being interesting because it goes straight to the sale, or more quickly to the sale. Their efforts are more aimed towards making a sale rather than Google's, which is just to bring an answer to any old question that somebody will ask. So actually having the control of your data and being able to give it to Google today, but also be able to give it to other machines today other machines today for tomorrow.
There is also another interesting, I think, area of research that I'm really willing to see how it will evolve, that it's related to the interconnection between the structured data and a blockchain. What if, I start, kind of claiming the ownership of the triples I publish? And what if, we could create a ledger of the usage of this triple in a different way? Because at the moment, the dialogue between, content publisher and the search engine is that I publish content, they get to index it, and I get the traffic back. And it works well. It's the, the paradigm of organic search is that, as a publisher, I get traffic from Google. And so I'm keen on exposing more information and making it more accessible to them so that they can create a service that, in return brings me back traffic. But as, this picture is changing and we see it changing, and there are less organic opportunity, wouldn't it make sense to kind of claim the provenance of the triples that, we can create and make available not only to Google, but to other machines?
Okay.
And now, yeah, in a way, Bill, yes. I mean, in a way, we're kind of coming back to this idea, but I think that with AI coming into play, the control on the provenance of the data that we produce, it becomes more important. It's not only because of, the scandal with Cambridge Analytica or the way that Facebook uses the data. I think it's more really in economical terms, it becomes more important to create an infrastructure for publishing data and claiming provenance for this data.
Okay, that's a really, really big question. Bill pointed out to me that asking that question would open a big bag of debate. So we're going to have to move on. I'm sorry, we'll have to do another episode about that.
Let's get back on SEO. I'm fine. I'm fine with that.
The topic layer. Danny Sullivan mentioned it a few weeks ago. I'll let you read the comment that he made. It all sounds terribly groovy. And then him and Nick Fox wrote this thing on Google, which is the idea is they've got these activity cards, they've got these collections, and they've got this dynamic organization of search results, which just sounds like basically search history to me, and just organizing it better. But then they say to enable this new functionality, they've had to understand interests and how they progress over time, which I think is important. And they've taken their knowledge graph and added a new layer called the topic layer, which is engineered to deeply understand a topic space and how interest can develop over time as familiarity and expertise grow. I like the idea. I don't know if it's. I mean, marketing guff. I need to explain what the word guff means. It means chunk. Is it just Google talking marketing to try and get a point out there, or is it truly, as they say, a fundamental transformation in the way search understands interests and longer journeys to help you find information? My initial thought about this was to make me think of the context cloud, which is why I'm going to start with Bill. What do you think about the topic layer? Is it marketing guff?
What it reminded me of when I first read about it was a project from Microsoft they did involving what they called refinding information, where they would talk about helping people track search trails through prior search histories to enable them to see things that they looked for before, which reminds me of the search activity cards. If you can, and the collections seemed a lot like Google Plus collections, where you could show Pinterest type pages where you're showing off pictures of things that you found and URLs and so on. It just seemed like a new way to interact with Google to maybe market them more. It's more like a finding. Did you? People also ask questions on search results as a way to use the knowledge graph to keep people on search results pages at Google longer. It seems marketing.
So marketing based. Cindy, do you see something deeper in there, or is it really just marketing?
Oh no, I think that it's definitely deeper. The topic layer takes your historical searches with what it knows on the topic and allows you to disambiguate the query using voice only. So if we know a lot about some topic like Monty Python, and I've searched for Monty Python on my home, my Google Home, I've searched for it on my web-enabled TV, things like that. The topic layer knows not only what device you're on, what you've searched for historically, but what the relationships are within this topic and which directions you can and cannot go. So we do have video on this. We do have audio on this. We don't have a map on this. And so it'll try and funnel you down a direction that you can go in the device that you're searching on. So it's a mix of the topic and understanding the topic as a whole, and then understanding your relationship to the topic and what you've cared about historically. And the idea of the historical searches, remember, they've got to aggregate and they've got to use the machine learning, quote unquote, not really there, but to aggregate all of your searches into one canonical search history across all devices, and to know when, let's say, in a home with multiple people, who's searching, to get it to your account versus your wife's account or your kid's account or whatever, to know who you are and what you want versus what someone else might want. So if I search for something about a dog, I'm probably looking for something related to my dog. If a kid on my account were searching about a dog, they might want the Bingo dog song, right? Or Baby Shark, if we're talking about shark. That's for later.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you. Andrea, you tell me what you think about the topic layer.
I think it's guff. No. Just kidding. Well, I mean, it's again, it's one way of looking at ontologies. Ontologies are built to create a context. So, and context is what create the knowledge after all. So, I mean, the way it's presented is, of course, a marketing gig, and I like it because it's a good way of letting users understand the way that the machine works. But I think in reality, it's extremely important because as Bill and Cindy said. I mean, it creates the context for a specific searcher intent. And also it enables a more conversational type of dialogue with the search engine, meaning that we don't get on the search engine once and then get off. I mean, we have a dialogue because we start looking for one aspect, and then we move on another aspect, and then we move on another aspect again. And so when we use, the reason we want to use ontologies or high-level hierarchies, such as the topic layer, is that we want to kind of restrict the domain that the search engine or the conversational assistant has to focus on in order to provide the right answer. I mean, right now I'm capable of triggering feature snippet from my website by speaking with the Google Assistant, by just saying Worldlift, what is structured data? Worldlift, what is linked data? It's all about creating clusters and then become relevant for that specific search experience. So I think it's a very important aspect. Nothing new. All the ontologies have had kind of these high-level layers in order to group information and to create domains. So it's just becoming part of the Google experience, but it's
okay. Yep. Sorry. And I got all overexcited about it, as is my want, because what I kind of got the idea of is it was taking all these ontologies that it had built on using the ODP or whatever it was, and then they said, okay, now we're starting to create these ontologies, very granular ontologies based on your user history, which for me implies they're using machine learning. I won't put the inverted commas because I truly believe in it, just like I believe in Peter Pan. They're using machine learning to actually build new ontologies, very granular ontologies, which is based on our own user experience, which I find incredibly exciting. And luckily, brings us on to the last question, which we're going to try and run through fairly quickly because we're running out of time, is this guy, James Fletcher, who was talking about learning using reasoned resources, learning, being logical, storing knowledge, going back to the reasoning and the learning. Don't know if that makes any sense to anyone because I'm explaining it much too fast. But the idea that the knowledge graph plus machine learning allows, and with a logical interface, allows Google or allows these machines to learn incredibly fast and build their knowledge bases. And Andrea, you were talking to me earlier on about the two different fields of machine learning and knowledge graphs. Can you repeat what you said, more or less? Yeah, I mean, in the past few years, in academics and conferences, there's always been two gangs. And the gangs were on one side, the good old-fashioned AI people coming from, the symbolic AI, so structuring information in graphs or hierarchical forms of some sort, and then the other gang, the people coming from, the non-symbolic AI, so the machine learning, the deep learning, and they've been always like kind of conflicting, much like in the past, people from linked data were conflicting with people from the NLP, from the natural language processing. And in the last 1 year and a half at this conference, finally I start seeing, a lot of great papers that combine, the knowledge graph with the machine learning in both ways. And that's actually, the diagram that you show is one of these examples where get back into the knowledge graph, and the knowledge graph provides the rich representation that, of course, a statistical approach wouldn't have. And that's really, I think, the new frontier is the combination of these two approaches to AI. Super. Bill, have you got a thought or two on that?
No, I think I need to do some reading.
Okay. I did my reading of James Fletcher, but I'm not sure I understood it all. Cindy, have you got any thoughts on that quickly to finish off?
Yeah, absolutely. Most SEOs don't realize it, but at about the same time Knowledge Graph, or about the same time Mobile First Indexing launched, the paid side of the house also did a major update and changed their platform. And I think this is what you're talking about is kind of where the topic layer and knowledge graph meets Google's ability to monetize. And the machine learning, the reason I did machine learning in air quotes is because I'm not sure there's as much machine learning on the topic side. I think that's already there from the knowledge graph. I think the machine learning is more on you and like how do we market to you and what is the appropriate ad to send to you. maybe there's probably other machine learning or related machine learning to build out the topic layer, but I think that Google is also trying to build out knowledge, a knowledge base based on individual users and what they want when they want it.
Brilliant stuff. Yeah, great. No, perfect. In fact, all of that was perfect. I've really enjoyed it. That's actually the last question for you three. I think, and that last question was because next season, the next 3 episodes is all about machine learning in AEO. We're going to have some great guests for that. Before I go into that, we're going to say thank you to Bill, Andrea, and Cindy. I thought that was astonishingly interesting. I loved all the stuff you've come up with and that you've pushed my way that I'm going to try and digest. So thank you for coming along and thank you for sharing. That was intelligent, interesting, and fun, which was the idea. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks to you.
I don't think we've got any time for questions, and I'm really sorry. I can't actually see very quickly any questions that I could ask, unless Cindy can see one. I know you've been following the chat. I haven't been able to.
No, I don't have a question.
Okay. All right. Yeah. My exit is very, very messy here, and I do apologize. Thank you to you three. Sorry we haven't got any time for questions. That was absolutely brilliant. For all the audience, we'll see you next week for machine learning. We've got Lexi Mills, Perna Virgi, and Stephen Kenwright to talk about machine learning 101, the why, the how, and what ML means to us as marketers. I know Stephen's going to talk to us about how we can use machine learning to beat the beast. Thank you very much. See you next week.